Here you see the first classification of network elements or electric circuit elements, simply classified into two types. The first one is the active elements and passive elements. So active elements and passive elements are two different ways to represent. Active, the term active represents it is a source. So whenever we find a source simply called as active, and passive represent this will be the consumer or the sink simply. Sink means which absorbs the energy. Source means which produces the energy. Okay, so that's why active elements are also called as often sources. So there are two kinds of sources actually. Sources can be classified as dependent sources and independent sources. Two classifications here. Again, the sources are classified into two, dependent sources and independent sources. So independent sources are nothing but voltage sources and current sources. The voltage sources again classified into two types. Ideal voltage source and practical voltage source. Ideal and practical. Similarly, current source also ideal current source and practical current source. So all these are the different classifications under independent sources. So independent sources are ideal, current source and voltage sources. So voltage sources can be ideal voltage source and practical voltage source. Similarly, current sources can be ideal current source and practical current source. Now coming to the dependent sources, because sources are classified into two types, independent and dependent, right? Now we have seen independent, we will see the dependent. Dependent sources are also classified into four types. The first one is voltage dependent voltage source. Simply we can say VDVS, voltage dependent voltage source. Second one is current dependent voltage source. Current dependent voltage source. Here, one of the source is depends upon another source. Actually, dependent sources means one source will be depending on another source, right? The third one is voltage dependent current source, simply VDCS. And the fourth one is current dependent current source. So likewise, the basic network elements, the first classification is classified into two types, active and passive. Now we have seen all the types and classifications in active, right? Now we will see the different classifications in passive. There are just three elements in the passive. The first one is a resistor, second one is inductor, and third one is capacitor. However, inductors and capacitors are simply energy elements, but the resistor is a dissipating element. It will dissipate the energy, whereas inductors and capacitors will store the energy like virtual energy sources. We will see in details about resistors, inductors, and capacitors.